I love that. Anyway, we'll start out. Thank you very much for being here on a Sunday morning. And I'm really excited to share with you some information about whole grains. First of all, let me just start by telling you what they are. We are probably really familiar with them already from wheat, corn, millet, rice, spelt, farro. We see these on restaurant menus. Sometimes we have them for breakfast, as in the case with oats, but we also are familiar with quinoa and barley and soup, and some of the less familiar ones, maybe triticale, sorghum, and amaranth. So we'll just kind of collectively talk about whole grains, and I'll try to do some screen sharing with you so that you can see the anatomy of a whole grain. I'm going to just share the screen here, see if this is possible. Uh, it's always one of those tricky things. We'll see if it happens. So I had this all queued up to share a different screen, but this is not working. I'm just going to edit this out. Point is, so we have a whole grain. It's a kernel, and I forgot to mention corn as being a whole grain. And I'm going to just show you this little kernel of corn. You've seen this a million times before, of course, when you make popcorn. But when you look at the kernel of corn, I'll just come back up here, you can see that it has a hard shell on the outside and then this white little tip. And down at that white little tip, but more on the inside, is what's called the germ. The hard shell on the outside is the bran, and we have the anatomy of a grain is consistent between a kernel of corn or a kernel of wheat, for example. So you have the bran on the outside, for example, which is the high fiber. We definitely know about that and the importance of fiber. And then you have the germ, which has nutrition like magnesium, thiamine, and vitamin E and healthy fats. And then you also have on the inside the white endoderm, which is what we are most familiar with when it comes to flour. So here happens to be some whole wheat flour. I could have shown you white flour and you would have been probably super familiar with it, but that white is the endoderm. And the endoderm is the starchy stuff that we love. So, anatomy of the popcorn, when it pops, here's a piece of popcorn, you see all that endoderm that has inflated and made the popcorn, and that's the starchy stuff. So that's the anatomy of grain. Like I mentioned, in each component there are specific nutrients that are important to us. The starchy stuff, as in the popcorn or regular all-purpose flour, which is the endoderm, is a great source of carbohydrate. This is where we get our energy. It's very valuable to us, and our body relies on carbohydrate as our primary source of energy. In the bran, like I mentioned, this is the outside shell of the kernel, and this is where we get fiber, and that's what's most notorious from the bran. But we also get zinc and copper, iron, as I mentioned, magnesium, B vitamins. So all of this is really important. As I mentioned when we first started out talking about the handful, actually quite a handful, a big handful of grains that are whole grains, we only find like a nice tiny handful at the supermarket. So some of these you actually have to order online or contact the company directly to get them. I want to show you just a few of the less ordinary ones. Well, let's start out by talking about the difference between, like, here you see white rice versus brown rice. We've seen this in the store before, but you can easily see how the bran off the outside of the brown rice has been removed, and the polished white rice has just the endoderm present. Or pardon me, yes, just the endoderm present, which is going to be that nice starchy rice that we love, but we get so much more with the brown rice. So a couple things that I want to talk about today is, yes, what is a whole grain? Secondly, where do we find whole grains and how do we know if we're getting enough? And finally, how do we work them into our regular everyday eating? So what's really interesting is we know whole grains are important. We know to read labels, we look at labels, and I brought a few, or I have a few labels handy to help us identify where we can find whole grains. A lot of times people associate whole grains with fiber, and it's not exactly a one for one. So, what you can be assured is when a whole grain has this little whole grain stamp, and that's very tiny, but you can see it there, this whole grain stamp, it assures that you're getting 100% whole grain. And in this one, this happens to be whole grain oat flour that I just happened to have and wanted to show you. You could also find this stamp on products that are 100% whole wheat. Anytime you see 100% whole grain or 100% whole wheat, then you know you're getting the whole grain. If you see the words whole grain, whole oat flour, whole anything, then you know you're getting a whole grain. Let's see, there are a couple other points I want to make about this. Sometimes you'll see a label and it'll say, labels are notorious for promoting what they do have. So maybe you see a granola bar label and it says, oh, 3 grams of whole grain. And you think, wow, this is great. I should buy this. Keep in mind that what's considered a serving of whole grain is 16 grams of whole grain. So that 3 grams is not exactly so significant. You can find this type of information when you look at the label. And for example, you see this happens to be whole grain pasta. And when I flip it over and look at the label back here, it's pretty tiny. I'll see if I can get it on up there. Right here, you'll see how much whole grain is in here. Let's see, 56 grams of whole grain are in a serving of this pasta. So you can see how reading the labels pays off. When you see something like 3 grams and you're thinking, well, a serving of whole grain is 16 grams, and then you see whole grain pasta and it has 56 grams, you can see this is a much better deal. So reading labels is really important. Now, here's what we do know because, all right, what's the value of seeking out whole grains? It's one, they're really flavorful. They add great texture. They come in all kinds of varieties so that you can get, like I said, a variety of nutrients, but you can also get a variety of textures and colors and how they perform in the product. You can get a variety of those aspects too. But why we should seek them out? Well, research shows that eating more whole grains has been shown to decrease our risk of heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and certain cancers. And in fact, eating more whole grains has been associated with someplace between 13 and 33% reduction in overall critical outcomes. This is really amazing. So I wanted to highlight that for you so that there's purpose to our madness here. So let's take a look at some of these whole grains I mentioned. I'll start with some of the more familiar. I love, love, love popcorn just because it's a great snack and so easy to make. And you can change the flavors so simply by adding an herb to the oil as you pop it, or perhaps sprinkling it with nutritional yeast or garlic powder or other seasonings. I'm kind of a fan of hot stuff, so I like the chili aspect. And uh, cornmeal is a nice whole grain that you can also include. Let's see, a couple others. Quinoa, we're really familiar with that one. Here's farro, which looks very similar to rice. And it also looks very similar to spelt. And spelt is kind of, in my world, it's an ancient grain, as is farro, but spelt is kind of the king of all grains because per fourth cup, you get about 38 grams of carbohydrate, 5 grams of fiber, 7 grams of protein. It's pretty significant. It's pretty powerful. Plus, you get all those nutrients from the bran and the endoderm. Couple others I want to show you. We often see barley in soup. This little guy. I love making salads out of barley as well. And here is bulgur, a little bit darker and cooks up very quickly, just like quinoa, 10 or 12 minutes, and you've got your completed barley ready to go for salads, soups, tossing into a pilaf, just really a great, great little grain. So again, as we talk about whole grains and how much is enough and what we're looking at, I wanted to highlight for you, I've got some whole wheat flour that I pre-measured into a little container. This happens to be a tablespoon and a half of whole wheat flour. And the reason I'm showing this to you is because this actually represents that 16 grams of whole grain. So when you think about, well, how much is that 16 grams that I need to get? It's about a tablespoon and a half of whole grain flour, for example. And if, let's say, you're making a soup or a sauce and you're going to thicken it with a roux, choosing a tablespoon and a half of whole grain flour is going to give you that serving of whole grain right there. So a couple things. Let's see, any questions so far? And I'm kind of guessing no. So if you have a question, just chime in. Let's see. So some ways that we get whole grains. What challenges have I heard from clients? Some people have looked at labels and the label says, oh, made with wheat flour. And in fact, this happened to me. I was very excited. I saw English muffins at the supermarket and it said made with wheat flour. Ran over there, flipped over the package. And as I mentioned, you want to look at the ingredient list. Now, this is not a good example because flour is flour, but let's see, with the pasta, there might be a couple other ingredients besides just the flour. So you want to look at the label, and while most of us are used to looking at the nutrition facts panel, you want to look at the ingredients down here. And the reason why I point this out, like I said, I was so excited about these English muffins. I ran over there, checked out the wheat flour English muffins. They were nice and golden brown, and I thought, what a great addition to breakfast. Flipped over the package, looked at the ingredients, and that's where you want to start with whole grains. And you want to look for a whole grain in the first several ingredients. So you would look for whole wheat or oat flour or some other version of whole grain. If you don't see that in the first several ingredients, then chances are the percentage of whole grain in that product are very slim. And when I actually read the package for my English muffins, I was so freaking disappointed. I was just absolutely disappointed because the the brown color was attributed to the caramel color that was added. In other words, yes, the English muffins were made with wheat flour, but they were made with a refined flour and probably an enriched flour, but definitely not the whole grain. So one of the things that I will show you when I finalize this video is I will show you a comparison between whole grain and enriched flour and refined flour so that you can see the nutritional difference that a whole grain product can make. So what are some ways that we can strategize for getting in more whole grains without complicating our lives? As I mentioned, popcorn's like one of my faves, and I made this really fantastic trail mix. And I like it because it's a little off the beaten path. And as I get closer, you can see some of the ingredients here. You've got popcorn, banana chips, wasabi peas, cranberries, a few pumpkin seeds. I'm also a big fan of almonds in here. And that's the trail mix. Super simple to throw together. Honestly, you can throw in there what you have and it really turns out perfect every time. And it makes a great snack that you can transport with you or just enjoy when you're uh, hanging around the house. What are some other ways? Enjoying whole grains as I'll share with you one of the challenges people have is they look at the package of whole grains and they look at the cook time. And some of the whole grains cook really fast, like bulgur or quinoa. But that makes those make for really easy whole grains to cook on a nightly basis. But some of the others, like spelt, which can take over 60 minutes, uh, that's not something you necessarily want to do on a Wednesday night. So what I like to do is I like to make a batch of whole grains. And there are a couple things I'll do with that. I'll take some of that and portion it out into what I might eat in a night's portion, label it on a plastic bag, a freezer grade plastic bag, label it with the date and how much, and put it in the freezer flat so that it stacks like a book. Another portion of that I will serve as a base for a stir fry. A third portion of that I will take and I will make a pilaf of sorts. So I'll add some chopped carrots, onions, maybe some peppers, or I'll add some extra seasonings to the vegetables that I add and mix in. I can serve that warm as a side dish, that pilaf, or I may take some of those leftovers, add a touch of vinegar, maybe a pop of like feta cheese, and serve it cold as a salad. And finally, what I like doing with a whole grain is taking that pilaf that I might have made, or even some of the plain whole grain that I cooked up, and mixing it with a binder, which can be anything from an egg to perhaps some flaxseed mixed with water, mixing it with a binder to create patties. I'll definitely add some seasoning to this. My faves are curry or sometimes a cumin, paprika, smoked chipotle. I love that kind of combination. Maybe some herbs in there as well. But I'll make little patties that can then be cooked up on parchment paper in the toaster oven. 350 for maybe 10 minutes. Maybe you might have to flip them just to keep the bottom side from burning. Once those are done, they make great bases for building salads. So I might put some greens that I've mixed with a dressing on top of the patty, or I might go warm with some sauteed vegetables and put that on top of the patty. Any leftover patties, of course, get put into the freezer, again in that freezer grade plastic zip bag, labeled, and I pull them out for quick toaster oven snacks throughout the week. Any grain at the final end of the week, I love throwing into soups or salads just to, again, use up all those dibs and dabs so nothing is wasted. Well, I hope that today has been really helpful. I do see that we went over just a tad. My apologies again. So glad that you could join me today, and I hope you have a wonderful week enjoying whole grains. Thanks, Bev, for being here.
Oh, thanks, Libby. It was very good.
Awesome.
I enjoy all this learning.
Good. Well, I'm just so excited that you jumped into the challenge, and yeah, any feedback that you have along the way, I greatly appreciate. So,
Oh yeah, sure. I didn't get to make those recipes yet. I'm dog sitting, and
oh,
she's a I just haven't gotten to the store. She leaves tomorrow, and then I'm making, and then I don't know why she's like a baby. I don't know. I feel like I can't go anywhere. But anyway, then
well,
I can't take her, and I can't take her in the store with me. So, but anyway, I am looking forward to all the recipes.
awesome. Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
somehow I learned about your business. Maybe Sammy told me. Anyway, I want to really congratulate you. I think you're onto something super, super hot. But but
Yeah.
hot but warm, like heartfelt warm, and then also it's one of those that's going to treat your life nicely. You know what I mean?
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. It is, yeah. So I do children, dogs, and adults. I'm gonna do an adult with Down syndrome. I'm gonna watch him a few nights a week. Yeah. So it's good. Yeah.
It's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I don't want to
Well,
keep
thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, thank you and really do have a great day.
Okay, thanks you too, Libby. See ya.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.